Empathy is not something that does well on social media. We don't see many examples of popular content that's about empathy online. The vast majority of content is more pithy, punchy, comedy, day in my life. It's not about like, here's a situation that happened to me, here's how it made me feel, here's what I hope you take away from it.
It just seems like empathy right now is being heavily politicized. People are losing their jobs for not mourning a certain way or saying things a certain way.
And I think that, to go back to the conversation, rooting it in what this means for young people in dating, that actually, I think, makes empathy more of an important value in their relationship.
Welcome to Ask a Matchmaker. I'm Matchmaker Maria, and on this episode, I'm joined by Rachel Janfaza. She's the founder of The Up and Up and writer of the Up and Up newsletter, where she shares her latest insights on Gen Z. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And for all my listeners, I want to welcome you again to season 6 of Ask a Matchmaker. This is episode 2. I want to remind you that this podcast is for everyone, whether you're single, in a relationship, or somewhere in between. You'll always find no-nonsense insights here into dating, relationships, compatibility, and love in modern times. And remember, dating is a privilege. And if you found your person, that is wonderful. But if you're single, which I know a big part of this community is, this space is especially for you. My goal is to give you the tools, the insights, and yes, sometimes the tough love you need to navigate dating with clarity and confidence. And if you haven't already, my book, Ask a Matchmaker, let me pick it up, is out. Go check it out. It's at your favorite local bookstores. It's on Amazon. It's on Audible and Spotify if you're an audiobook person and you really love my voice. I've heard from everybody to put me at 1.25 to get the real speed of me, Matchmaker Maria. You can also head to matchmakermaria.com to submit your dating questions or to join the Roundtable, my community for singles who are ready to date with intention. There's a special promo code waiting for you in the show notes. All right, before we begin today, I need to acknowledge the reality we're all living in. The country feels tense. It's divided, and frankly, it's a little frightening. As someone who really loves America, I feel scared about where we're heading. Women's rights are being stripped away. Content is being censored, and even grief and empathy are being politicized. But dating doesn't happen in a vacuum. The culture we live in, our politics, our freedoms, our values, they shape how we define love, family, and success. And that's why today's conversation matters. NBC News just released a poll showing how Gen Z men and women are divided on issues like family, work, and mental health. These aren't abstract numbers. They're the forces shaping who we swipe on, who we marry, and how we build our futures. To help me unpack what this poll really tells us, I'm joined by Rachel Janfaza. As I mentioned before, Rachel is the founder of Up and Up Strategies and a leading expert on Gen Z. She's written extensively about how young people see family, politics, and relationships, and why bridging divides will take empathy and honest conversation. Rachel, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
What was your first reaction to this NBC poll?
The data is really stark, but I think we've seen this gender gap playing out for many years now, and this poll was a crystallization of many of the trends that I've heard in my own listening sessions with young people across the country over the past many years. It shows a reality in which young men and young women have diverging life priorities and visions of what will make them successful.
And on that, we see in this how they've ranked it 1 to 13. Female voted for Harris. Her number 1 is having a job or career you find fulfilling. Men who voted for Harris, number 1, having a job or career you find fulfilling. Female voted for Trump, achieving financial independence, which to me is synonymous with what the liberal side of Gen Z is saying, which is having a job or career you find fulfilling.
Right.
But then the thing that kind of shocked me was the number 1 for men who voted for Trump. Their number 1 was having children, something they can't do themselves.
Right. There's an asymmetry within that polling. And I think what also was surprising to me was that the young men, or not even necessarily surprising, but was interesting to me, was that the young men across the board, regardless of party, ranked having children higher than young women of their same party. So if you look at the young men who voted for Harris,
it's right. It's
they
number
also
10.
Right, and young women ranked it lower.
They ranked it at 12.
Right.
But if I'm looking at the top 5 core values, right, I see two things. I see that it looks like the men who voted for Harris, they are reality aligned with women who voted for Harris and women who voted for Trump. Just if you look at the top 5, it's almost identical, with the exception of women who voted for Trump owning your own home. And I think when I saw that, and I see the men who voted for Trump as having children, I then thought about, well, let me get into the mindset of Gen Z. I've been in my 20s before, right? I really struggled with this because I remember when I was graduating college and then being a young adult in my mid-20s, and maybe it's because the financial crash of 2008 happened when I was 23, so my idea of home ownership wasn't even part of a conversation.
Right.
I didn't think of the building roots as my top 10.
Yep. I think that there are a few things playing out when you look at this.
Okay.
For those young men who ranked it as their top life priority measure of success, I think that's a way to push back against this instability and chaos that many young Americans have grown up in. And I think that that traditional role of being a father and having children is something that many young men feel provides a layer of control and stability in their lives. I think that part of the reason why, at least in my own research, what I'm hearing in listening sessions, you hear many young women saying that they don't feel ready to think about having children yet. It's kind of something that will exist down the line. The reason that they say that in part is because of the financial concerns that you mentioned. There are a lot of similarities if you look at the situation that millennials graduated into in the 2000s into the situation that young people feel they're in now in 2025, when there's economic instability, there's a global trade war, and the rise of AI is completely changing the workforce. Young people and young women, interestingly enough, in particular, are expressing a lot of concern about making sure that their financial situation is in place and that they reach that level of financial independence, which even those Trump voting young women expressed was important to them.
Yeah.
More so than young men. And young men are prioritizing those traditional values. So there's been a shift in who is prioritizing the traditional roles that relate to family and children, where young men are prioritizing that, whereas young women are looking for fulfillment and independence.
It's interesting that the financial crisis of 2008 and what millennials kind of grew into, and seeing a lot of people not only lose their jobs, lose their homes, there had to be this sort of rebuilding process. You were quite young when that was happening.
Yeah.
And then I can see with Gen Z where you do see this, you just said it, right? You see the global trade war and the rise of AI. I understand what you mean by going back to traditional values, but how do we look at this data? Now I'm going into gender, right?
Yeah.
The majority of Gen Z men, or I believe it was the majority of Gen Z men, voted for Trump.
Yes, the majority of young men voted for Trump. And for young women, there's been different estimates, but about 14 points lower than the amount of young men who voted for Trump. There was a 14-point gender gap.
I believe that you have to match on certain core values when it comes to dating. And I'm sure that people are articulating it different here, but this does show up on dates.
Of course it does.
Right? And so what I'm seeing here is that all women across aisles, they still have a lot of core value similarities with the liberal men, or at least men who voted for Harris. But then there's this core values misalignment with the majority of the people that are in their dating pool.
Yeah.
So how do we, Like, where is this push coming from? Where are these traditional values being promoted?
Social media. And I think I wrote last week when this data came out, a piece in my newsletter, The Up and Up, about the data and my thoughts on it. And one of the elements that I pointed out was that part of the reason why young men and young women have different values right now, or different goals and ideas for what success looks like, is because they are living in completely different echo chambers online, where depending on your gender, you're being fed a completely different slew of information, of content, of entertainment, and the voices that are resonating with young people online are just different by gender, and that's a fact.
Do you think that Gen Z men who grew up like their 20s was part of seeing in their media sphere the Me Too movement unfold, but not having any context to that? Because, you look at millennial men, you look at Gen X men, they're a little bit more liberal than their Gen Z counterparts. Yeah. And I believe, and you can absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that they got to see, forget the financial stuff, let's just talk about gender for a second. They did see what happened before Me Too. Mm-hmm. They were aware of certain workplace dynamics. They might have even participated in that sort of culture, but they're aware of it. And I wonder sometimes when I think about what the sphere is showing, the algorithm is showing to different genders, especially in Gen Z, when you don't have context about where Me Too comes from, how that affects your opinion on the opposite gender that you hope to build a family with.
Yeah, I think that it actually has built up a lot of resentment amongst the different genders against each other in a way. And oftentimes I feel the algorithm and kind of society writ large, even a lot of times media, pins young men and young women against each other because there's data showing that they have a different worldview. And so it kind of gets exacerbated when it gets repeated over time and it gets ingrained kind of into the psyche. Part of what I mean by this is that I've heard many young men, especially in conversations around the 2024 election, when there was a lot of intrigue around young men who voted for President Trump in particular. And I would ask them, what are the issues that you care most about and why did you vote for Trump? And a lot of young men said it felt like they were being excluded from a national dialogue and that he gave them a space where they felt welcomed, and he showed up on the podcast that they were listening to and engaged with creators that they follow and spoke in a way that resonated with them and used language that was similar and was funny and all of these things that made them feel like there was a place for them. And that's a response to this post-Me Too world where a lot of young men, whether this is the reality of the situation or just what they're feeling, they have said that they feel that there has been so much correction made for the poor behavior of men from generations prior that it has kind of placed blame on them, even though they weren't born in a time where that existed. And that.
How do you feel about hearing this?
Well, I think that assumes that a lot of the pre-Me Too culture has completely gone away, which we all know is not the case. And if you ask young women, and this comes up in the polling as well.
That the majority of women feel like gender is a major signifier on career success, whereas men, I think it was men only half, was it 20%? So in the graph, it says here that 69% of men said that it doesn't make a difference, whereas half of the women that responded said that it does.
Yeah. So there's a disconnect there. And
it's like a 20-point disconnect.
And what I'm hearing in my listening sessions is that young women, regardless of their political background, do see the way that gender impacts their lives, whereas young men are less likely to see the way it impacts their lives. And also there are some men who think that it impacts their lives negatively because we've kind of corrected as a society for some of the ills of men of generations past.
How have we corrected? Because I don't feel that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reality is that these trends persist, but men feel that because there were massive women's marches and because there were all of these demonstrations and because there are more perhaps programs in workplaces that hire women or hire people from different backgrounds, they feel that it kind of has pushed back against the status quo from years prior. But again, I think when you hear from women, that's not actually the case in the way that they're experiencing it in their day-to-day lives. But I think just to go back to my earlier point about the way that these dynamics have pinned young men and young women against each other. It certainly plays out in dating, in relationships, even in friendships, because they've grown up in a world where these gender wars are playing out in real time, both on and offline. And there's also significant data that has shown that young men are falling behind on a whole range of metrics. There's a specific Bloomberg piece in particular that shows data showing young men graduating high school at lower rates than young women, matriculating to college at lower rates than young women, and the career opportunities have sort of shifted. So while young women have started taking roles in STEM fields, young men are not taking as many roles in what are considered the care economy roles that have traditionally been held by women.
Right.
And so there's just more job opportunity perhaps for young women, because not only are they graduating at higher degrees and then able to...
Well, an AI cannot replace a nurse. AI cannot replace any caregiving role. Like, I totally understand what you're saying. But what I don't understand here is, we're talking about, let's say, a 27-year-old man who might have this... to me, it sounds, I'm a victim, even though we live in a patriarchy and this world was designed to make men succeed, right? Why is it then, you just mentioned high school, that more women are graduating high school, they're outpacing, they're matriculating to college, they're outpacing men. Why is that the fault of women? I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm saying I don't understand the logic behind what is being expressed to you.
I think...
Do you see where I'm understanding by what you're saying?
Yes, but I don't think that they're necessarily saying it's the fault of women. I don't think they're necessarily putting blame on their counterparts who are the same age. I think they're just saying that everyone expects them to have these opportunities when, in fact, those opportunities might not exist for them in the same way it did when there was a leg up for men in these ways through education, through careers in years prior. So they're not saying it's the fault of the young women who they're growing up with, but rather that because we've course corrected, they're still being treated as though they have the upper hand, when in their lived experience, for lack of a better word, they haven't necessarily had that upper hand. I'll give you an example. A young man that I spoke to after the 2024 election who said that he runs a small business. He has always paid men and women the same, at times paying women more than the men that he hires. And yet societally, he feels like it's assumed that he's a bad person just because he's a white man. And yet in his own business practice, he has actually treated genders equally, if not oftentimes treating women perhaps better than he's treated young men. So that's just an anecdote that I've heard.
That feels like projection. This feels like, why are you taking things like this so personally?
Well, I think this is the media environment that we've grown up in as well, where everything on social media is portrayed in a binary where it's very black and white and there's little room for nuance in between. So it kind of does inherently pin people against each other, and it seeks out that binary. And so what's one of the most obvious examples of that? Man versus woman. And I think that the algorithm in particular, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, really exacerbates that divide.
I do talk about this in chapter 3 of my book, that, the main thesis is that you don't necessarily have to agree in the same politics, but you must live in the same reality.
But they don't live in the same reality.
That's the issue.
Right.
And it's really lopsided. But it feels like, I don't want to believe that what I'm about to say is my own personal bias, okay? But I do believe that connection can only happen by someone being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. The only way to be vulnerable is to be empathetic. The only way to be empathetic is to be inclusive, to bring people to your table, it goes, what empathy is, to walk in someone else's shoes. Right? And from the data that we're seeing, it looks like liberal men who voted for Kamala Harris, I don't want to assume they're all liberal, they have a much higher rate of meeting not only maybe financial goals, but relationship goals, because there's a bigger pool of women that they might align with. I see this at work as a matchmaker.
Yeah,
right?
But in the data, it did, on paper, the interesting thing is that the young men who voted for Trump are prioritizing those relationships higher, even if the women aren't at the same rate, which is a is an asymmetry that exists.
I do see lately that there is a very different way that Gen Z communicates to me in my office and in my DMs versus how millennials speak to me, Gen X speaks to me, and boomers speak to me.
What are those differences?
I mean, this actually happened even at a book event, but there is this sort of hysteria, this, to quote someone that actually DM'd me, the spiraling of, oh my gosh, I'm 27 years old and I'm not engaged yet. Am I doomed? Even when I was 27, I never heard that. Not just in my office, through my friends. Like, sure, if you maybe go to like the suburbs or, you know, areas where they're not next to urban areas where people tend to get married younger, right? Because there's less opportunities and familiarity and all that stuff. You understood that, like, okay, your time will come. If that's something that's a goal, you're going to do X, Y, Z, and your time will come. I do believe that there is this sort of algorithm online that is teaching young women, oh, you're not married and, you know, living on a homestead and, you know, baking cookies from scratch, and you're not pregnant with your fourth kid by the age of 24, you failed.
Yeah, well, it's really...
And I don't think the person that I'm referencing, I don't think that's her intention. And it's not. I'm certain that's not her intention, to make anyone feel bad. But when you look at the comments from 19-year-old women, 21-year-old women, 25-year-old women, it's all, this is the life I want. I wish I was married now. It's overwhelmingly yearning.
Yeah, I mean, but that's not what the data shows, right? But I think that what's interesting...
What does the data show?
The data shows that they're prioritizing their independence and financial stability higher than having kids,
Right.
even if the social media... So there's also an asymmetry between what's glamorized on social media versus what the reality of people actually want, according to this poll and in my research. One of the other things that came up in this poll and in my research that is related to this is the gap in anxiety levels and stress.
Oh my gosh. So it was 1 in 5 men feel anxiety. And if I'm not mistaken, it was 70% of women.
Yeah. So
that's a huge gap.
Yeah. So when I hear this playing out, and I had an intern this summer, her name is Brooke, and she wrote a great piece for us on the Up and Up about, she's a twin. She has a twin brother who's the exact same age. Obviously, they've gone through the exact same life, but they have a really different outlook. And so she wanted to see if it was just isolated to them or if this was something that was a trend. So she asked 6 boys and 6 girls a variety of questions about their life experiences. And there were 2 things that came up that were really related to this and really poignant. The first was that when she asked the young women, what are you thinking of in the future for success? None of them mentioned, they mentioned independence and work and success and maybe a family. And many of the young men she spoke to mentioned a wife. So none of the young women mentioned a husband, but the young men were mentioning a wife. So that's interesting. That relates to the data there. The other...
Pause. While you're speaking, what I'm thinking is, who's raising these different people? It can't just be all algorithms.
Fair.
But continue.
The other thing that I think was really interesting is that the young women expressed a lot more anxiety about the future, as the poll showed. And there is a sense from young women that they're always thinking about the future and thinking long term about the future. And I think they are still living in a world where these traditional expectations of what a man and a woman should want and the roles that they should play exist, whereas the young men are thinking more in the present, and in their present ideation of what their future looks like, they're focused on things like having kids or being married, whereas the young women are thinking more bigger picture about like life fulfillment in general.
I feel like this is opposite. I feel like what you just said is the opposite, is that women are thinking in the present, I need to get a job, I need to be financially independent, and the men are thinking in the future, I want to get married, I want to have kids.
I think it's flipped, because for the men, they want that first before I think they want their career to be settled, whereas the women want their career to be settled before they have kids. But I think that where I'm going with this is that a lot of the anxiety I hear from young women goes to what that 27-year-old said to you at your book event, which is that they feel that they are on this sort of time horizon, this prescription of what their life is supposed to look like that's been set out for them. And there are so many examples of that play out on social media that show this is what, the perfect life is supposed to look like. And that doesn't match up with their current lived reality and the sort of odds that many young people, regardless of gender, feel are stacked against them. And I think my sort of big takeaway on this data, the gender gap in general, and sort of where we can go from here, because I think it's important to think about solutions too, is that while we know that the data is showing that the roles of young men and women are changing and do not look like they did pre-Me Too or when more men were graduating and getting higher education and entering the workforce at higher rates than young women. That's flipped. So why are we still expecting young women and young men to have the paradigm of the roles that they're supposed to play that existed in the past if the workforce and the education landscape has flipped? The idea of what roles they should play should too. And so while young men are now prioritizing these traditional roles and values and young women are more prioritizing independence and fulfillment, the expectations of what they're supposed to do haven't kept up at the same speed.
I do reference what you just said in my book, that we know more women are going to college, this is happening, but we still live in a hypergamy world where we are socialized to believe that in that traditional gender role, the man is going to be more educated, he's going to make more money, he's also going to be taller. We want something, and that is something that just exists. That's the playing field that we're all living in, okay? And not to mention that, our grandmothers and our mothers, they didn't have access to the opportunities that you and I have access to when they were growing up. And marriage was seen as a way to financial stability. And it's funny because whenever I hear someone say, oh, back then they were happier and they weren't getting divorced. Well, divorce wasn't usually on the table. Like it was, for some people, impossible. It was a matter of, living in a house and having food and living on the street. The fact that I am, I think, the same age with being able to own a business as a woman, because it happened in the 80s, is funny to me. Right? And in just such a short time of that independence and the ability to extend our wings, women have been able to achieve so much. I really struggle to understand how the genders in Gen Z are in this binary competition, as you put it, right? Where they're being pitted against each other. My only understanding, I don't, like in that with your coworker who's a twin, right? The person who wrote it, right? They were raised in the same household. I'm assuming their parents love them the same, right? I'm assuming their parents showed them a certain standard of relationship. So what I'm concluding is to what algorithm are they faced with? Because you've been raised with an algorithm.
100%.
You probably don't remember a world before a smartphone. Did you?
I've written about, so within Gen Z, I've written a lot about the two Gen Zs, and I'm on the oldest cusp of Gen Z.
Because you're before COVID, right?
Yes. And so I had a flip phone before I had an iPhone, but
wait, how old, what? How did you have a flip phone before an iPhone?
School, in 5th grade.
That's how you know it's different, because we weren't even allowed. I had a flip phone in college. But because even when we had the Nokia blocks, the flip phones had yet to come out, those weren't allowed in high school. Like, you were not allowed to bring them in. The principal would take them and your parent had to come and pick it up. But you had a flip phone. So what year are we talking about?
2008.
I was entering grad school then. Okay. Smartphones had come out by then.
2009.
The iPhone was already out by then.
Maybe my parents didn't want me to have one. I don't know what it was,
smart.
but I did have a flip phone. But I remember I got
how to text with T9,
like where you had to press the number letters multiple times. Yes. But then we had like
hold on,
NV2s,
this is really important.
Something.
Right, I understand. And this is really important here, okay? When you had a cell phone, was it unlimited texting whatever time or unlimited calls whatever time?
I mean, it depends on your plan.
You don't understand what I'm talking about.
No.
You couldn't. Oh my God, I'm old.
No, but the point
is. The point is, the reason why I'm mentioning this is, right, is this is actually how millennials, I remember life without internet.
Yeah. And
I remember T9. And I remember that we weren't allowed to text or call anyone until after 9 p.m. so it would be free. If I texted you, that cost me 10 cents. And if you texted me back, that cost you 10 cents and it cost me 10 cents back. So you had to create a very like inner circle to participate in that. You still had to meet in person. You still had to go to the mall because God forbid someone is having a breakup via T9. First of all, they're going to give themselves carpal tunnel, but also it's going to cost you a lot of money as a friend to have to do that. So you'd be like, okay, I'm just going to come over.
Right.
So
there's so many many differences about the way that Gen Z dates. Different. I just published a piece today about the new dating guru ChatGPT and about the role of AI in dating and relationships and my analysis on what I think is lost from that.
Okay.
But I think what I sort of set up the scene with is that the way Gen Z dates has been different from the time Gen Z started dating because it started with Snapchat and Snapstreaks.
Digital world.
Right. And hard launches on Instagram and just these things that were so normalized for our generation that didn't exist. But even within Gen Z, there are differences in sort of the normalized behaviors and the dating patterns. I know younger Gen Zers who have had a very different relationship to flirting even because of Snapchat and Snap Maps and the ability to look at a map and see where all of their contacts are before they go into a public place. So it changes the game in terms of chance interactions altogether. I mean, I remember like walking into the mall or a movie or even just if I got to school early and seeing someone that I had a crush on, whereas they can look on their Snap Map and make sure that either the person is there, so they go there purposefully, or that the person isn't there who they don't want to see. So it's just really different even within Gen Z itself.
Gen Z is in general different just because we see it even in dating, right? I think Gen Z in general measures authenticity as their number one thing. You see this across the board. Younger Gen Z, older Gen Z, authenticity is number one. And that makes sense to me as someone who's reading the data because it's like, well, you grew up in a non-analog world. I don't think a lot of Gen Z people have experience with rejection.
Yes, I've written about this as well.
Tell me more about that.
There's a lack of resiliency amongst Gen Z. I think in part we grew up in a time period where, and there's been a lot written about this too, the coddling of the American mind, about sort of we were bubble wrapped, and both because our parents, we were born either just before or just after 9/11 and in a world with new technologies, and there were so many factors of things that our parents wanted to protect us from. And so I don't blame my parents for doing this, but
just to like give you a little, my parents used to send me and my sister to Greece as unaccompanied minors on Olympic Airways, 9-hour flight.
Yeah.
With a person smoking next to us, a complete stranger, a 35-year-old man, just, I mean, are you the generation of helicopter parents?
Yes.
Ah.
And tiger moms and all of that.
And tiger moms. Oh my God, you're the second person that mentioned that today to me. I was like, I haven't heard that term in a while.
That's funny.
So tell me more about what you're saying.
And so then it's ironic because we also grew up on social media where rejection is the norm, but it's also very easy to hide that rejection because you can delete comments, you can delete a post that didn't perform well, you can post something with edits.
It's interesting how you understood my question too, like what I just said about rejection, because you immediately, and that makes sense, right? Because you immediately went to like, we can hide comments, we can hide likes. When I said that, I think, well, how did I learn about rejection? Typical high schooler, went to the mall, we didn't have phones, you interacted with other high schoolers.
Yeah.
You shoot your shot.
Right.
They're like, I'm not interested. You lick your wounds at the Cinnabon.
Yeah.
And then you create that resilience where like, well, I'm going to always shoot my shot.
Right. Well, the interesting thing is that I think social media has also upped the ante on that too, because I remember this so clearly, a time in middle school where I felt so excluded because I saw that my friends were hanging out without me because they were posting pictures.
Right.
And so that was rejection.
Right.
I wasn't invited to the hangout.
And it's a digital rejection.
Right.
You don't have friends to lick your wounds like I did at the Cinnabon.
But, and I remember.
I don't mean you don't have friends, but you understand what I'm saying.
I totally understand it. Yes,
But
I didn't have friends
so
I
in this
show my
context,
mom.
So now that we're talking about this, right, your generation has been raised incredibly different than my generation.
Right.
I mean, you and I are only 12 years apart. We might as well be from different planets. I see it at work. I have Gen Z clients now.
Yes.
And just the way they talk, it's
Yes.
like, how can I convey that we need to practice our vulnerability and our empathy? Because there have been instances where like a client goes on a great first date and they even go on a great second date. But then that person, and sometimes it's a woman, like I don't see a long-term connection,
Yeah.
let's go to the next one. And then the men that I'm working with, they're like sometimes angry with me, like, how dare you introduce me to her? And I'm like, you had a great time. She had a great time. This is dating.
Right.
I don't have that experience with my older clientele.
That's interesting. I think also,
At least not at this level,
there are so many differences, as we've pointed out, between Gen Z, millennials, and even within Gen Z, between the two Gen Zs. But I also think that at the root of it, it comes down to, like you said, vulnerability and emotional connection and wanting to feel included and wanting to feel valued. And I think this gets into the conversation about dating too, because young men and young women don't want to hate each other.
I don't think they do.
They actually want to be able to, for the most part, they want to be able to come together. I do think there is more of a trend now where women, think that they can do it without a man because in part they can,
right.
More so than they could in generations past. It's less stigmatized.
But Rachel, in that poll, liberal women, liberal men, conservative women, they had emotional stability quite high up. Right? And liberal men had it at the bottom.
Yes.
Emotional stability is required for any healthy relationship.
Yes. I think that and not to get back to this and blame it all on the algorithm.
I am going to blame the algorithm. But do you have data that tells me that it's not the algorithm, it's not the content? Because I just want to just say one thing here. And I promise I'll stop interrupting you. No. But in that algorithm that is being fed to you and me and our producer and every single woman and man listening or watching this or whatever, right? The people behind those videos make money. And the more outrageous they say things, like for instance, just a few weeks ago after Taylor Swift got engaged, a popular podcaster said, now Taylor must submit to her husband or must submit to her fiance. It doesn't matter if it's being said in jest. What happened is now you have the outrage clip. Now it goes on YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, TikTok. And now I get to monetize off this. And that is not just that particular content creators. It's a lot of outrage bait that is being fed into each of our respective algorithms that people are making money from.
Yeah. Well, I think that it also, when you're looking at empathy, empathy is not something that does well on social media either. I think
Say more.
We don't see many examples of popular content that's about empathy online. Sure, there are some creators with podcasts who talk about living an empathetic life and those values,
but our attention span swipes it away.
The vast majority of content is more pithy, punchy, comedy, day in my life. It's not about like, here's a situation that happened to me, here's how it made me feel, here's what I hope you take away from it. And I think that there's a lot that's lost when we aren't having that in-person conversation with one another, when we sort of cede our attention time to social media, because that just doesn't perform well. And so you're not going to see it on your feed, or you're going to scroll past it because it's not engaging in the same way. So I wrote in this op-ed that I wrote for the Washington Post last spring about the
Remind me the title so I can include it in the show notes. I love the title.
The title was called "You Can't Bribe and Shame Your Way to Babies."
Oh, I love this article.
And at the end of it, I talked about how the path forward starts with having empathy and having conversations, between men and women. And I think that those conversations have to take place offline. I think in part some of them can take place online. You can, of course, I'm not saying it, you can meet someone on a dating app, all of that. This isn't even about dating. It's just about in general.
I wrote a whole chapter about offline. Like, I think that is the only... just like you, I have no hate to online dating apps. I think they're an excellent tool to meet people you would have otherwise never met.
Yeah, of course.
But there is something about offline connections. I know I mentioned this a lot on my Instagram, but my husband belongs to 2 different backgammon clubs. Now, he's in his mid-40s, right? But for him, it's not only a place to connect with people who love this ancient game.
Yeah.
But it's also a place to, like... The more people you meet, the more opportunities you have to meet people from different walks of life, the more resilient you become in hearing not only different perspectives, but growing that empathy.
Yeah, and in a perfect world, social media would actually amplify that because it's easier to make connection online than it is, because you can be talking to someone from a different country or from a different walk of life than you, a different age, whatever. But our echo chambers oftentimes prohibit that from happening. That said, I think there is a strong movement amongst young people that I've been talking to, particularly in that Gen Z 2.0 cohort, the younger part of Gen Z who grew up during the COVID lockdowns, had life milestones taken away from them because of the pandemic, and grew resistant to
they're revolting.
They want in person,
life, yeah.
Right? Exactly. And how can
259% increase in dating comedy events, and comedy events, according to Eventbrite. Gen Z is the younger side of Gen Z. Yeah, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, but they want to go to concerts. They want to have these in-person experiences where they can meet people face to face.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the ways we move beyond this gender gap, because it's about having conversations, and it's about confronting each other's differences. And no one's saying you have to have the same exact outlook on life
or ideology.
the same exact opinions. Not at all, actually. That's the opposite. Young people are really craving dialogue and debate now more than ever. But I think that being in a space where you can actually engage instead of just swipe past is really important.
Right now, we are seeing, as we record this, our media, I don't even say flirting. I think it's becoming a little bit like antitrust laws and anti-monopoly laws are currently just being broken across the board, with media companies and conglomerates gobbling up different stations to pursue a certain message. Mm-hmm. So even like traditional media is going in a certain direction. And our algorithm, at the time of this recording, we are just days away for the TikTok algorithm to be handed to one of the media companies that actually owns some of the traditional media. So everything is kind of being consolidated. And I just think about how not only algorithmically, like on our phones, but even in traditional media, how that's going to impact if it feels like, well, I want eyes on me. I want eyes on you on this app. I want to take you away from not doing in real life events. I want you to be, I feel like a lot of the media that's being shown right now in traditional media or even on the app is like, I want you to be scared. I want you to be divided because you get to stay on the app and I get to make money off of you. So now I don't know if you see this. That's the reality that I'm currently feeling.
I mean, it's definitely what we're seeing online, but I'll tell you, I did a listening session last night virtually with 8 students. It was in response to the tragic killing of Charlie Kirk. And the point of the conversation was to talk about freedom of speech, campus dialogue, and political discourse.
How old were these people, and what was the gender breakdown?
The gender breakdown was, I have to count in my head, there were 1, 2, I believe there were 4 young men and 4 young women. It was split.
All right. And the ages?
The ages were 18 to, they were most of them were freshmen in, range from freshmen in, there was a senior in high school to a senior in college.
Okay. So what did you learn in this listening session?
So this listening session is obviously in a really unique moment in American history and American political history in particular, but it tracks with what I've been hearing from young people over the past many years, which is that they're sick and tired of a political discourse that pins people against each other, doesn't welcome room for nuance, and is divisive, and that is it's toxic and it's frustrating to them. And what I asked, so they got into a debate on the call, which I thought was great. They were talking about freedom of speech on their campus and the way that their various schools were handling instances of protest over the past few years. And they have such nuanced takes, and they were challenging each other's beliefs because there was a space where they were able to do it on this call. And some of them are part of clubs on campuses, whether it's a political forum or a extracurricular group that works to bring people from different ideological backgrounds together to have a conversation, but not all of them. But this is something that's a core value for this generation, especially for Gen Z 2.0, the younger half of this generation, is that they're craving those spaces for nuanced dialogue amid this broader conversation that oftentimes silences that.
In that listening session, is there any acknowledgement that some of this divisiveness that they might be experiencing comes from the top?
Yes, 100%. That's
like our president and our vice president. Our vice president went on a podcast. He's supposed to represent the whole country, and he vilified half of them.
I think that there is a frustration with both party leadership.
How it's not the same. I'm not attacking you. I want you to get this the wrong idea. I'm reacting to what you're saying, and I'm not saying you're wrong. Okay, so I really need you to understand the difference in my passion here. I cannot comprehend the both side thing. So please explain that to me.
But, okay, what one young man on the listening session shared yesterday was that the same people who are, it's on both, the reason it's on both sides is because you have people who are calling the president a fascist or a Nazi, and then you have people on the left who are, those are people on the left, and then you've given examples of situations on the right. So everyone's sort of the temperature is heightened on both sides. When in reality, we shouldn't be vilifying anyone, and everyone is a human. And that's what they iterated to me, and I agree.
It just feels like we're not really understanding each other on the left and the right.
Totally.
Because first of all, I don't think it's unfounded for the left to react to what we are seeing in all media, right? There is an oligarchy taking place right now, right? Like 10 companies own this country at this point. And there is, we are seeing the diminishment of our First Amendment rights. We are seeing threats to our own citizenship being put out in the sphere from our actual political leaders, from the leaders of this country. So on one hand, you have the side where it's okay, is the president a fascist? But the other side is saying, what exactly? That this is okay, that First Amendment rights can be trampled, and...
Well, I think ironic. I think it's kind of an ironic reaction, and no, I think that I just speak from the perspective of what I hear in my listening sessions.
Oh, I know.
They want.
You're sharing.
They're right. They're craving that freedom of speech, and so this was a conversation that happened yesterday at 5 p.m. It
just seems like empathy right now is being heavily politicized. People are losing their jobs for not mourning a certain way or saying things a certain way.
And I think that, to go back to the conversation, rooting it in what this means for young people in dating, that actually, I think, makes empathy more of an important value in their relationships.
Absolutely. And that's totally how I'm going to end the show today too, right? But that's why it is, to me, I'm seeing empathy is being really weaponized here. And I feel it from the right? Because that's who's calling for people to...
But we saw someone on the right get literally assassinated for freedom, for speaking their opinion. So it is clearly on both sides.
Who assassinated him?
I don't know the exact facts of this person, but we saw someone was killed.
Right, but you're saying they were assassinated by the left?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they were killed for share. I don't know the exact motive or reason.
The reaction to that person being assassinated is also our vice president and the senior administration have come out on TV, including our president, to blame the left for that. I don't think anyone should be killed for saying their opinion. But we can't weaponize empathy, because then how will anyone ever express empathy? Because even the lack of empathy of something happening, like, okay, a lot of people don't know who this person is when it happened, right? They can see some quotes. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, I come at this from a nonpartisan point of view, and I believe that I have heard from young people time and time again, no matter what side that they're on, that there have been times when they have been made to feel othered or ostracized for their ideology, regardless of what side they're on, and they're tired of political division altogether. And whether that is a result of leadership or algorithms or whatever it is, the reality is this is what Gen Z has grown up in, and it has shaped how they view the world.
It's going to shape how they create families if it's something that they want to do. Rachel, I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your perspective, sharing your professional opinions, sharing all about your writing. I think you're a fantastic writer, and everyone should check out The Up and Up. I'll include a link to the show notes. Where can people learn more about you, though? Other than the newsletter, of course.
You can go to theupandup.us, which is the newsletter, or upandupstrategies.com. And I'm on social media, Rachel Janfaza, the.upandup on Instagram. You can check out all of our content there. You can hear from the young people that I talk with. But thank you so much for having me. This is such an important conversation, especially right now. And I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to talk with you.
Absolutely, Rachel. Again, thank you again. And I'll include all those links in the show notes. I think what we've learned today is that the challenge is learning to hear each other without reducing everything to culture war scripts. And in this moment where rights are being stripped away and even empathy, as we talked about, is being politicized or weaponized, dating becomes more than a personal choice. It's an act of resilience, and it requires empathy and vulnerability more than ever. Because no matter what the polls say, the way forward in love and in life is the same: curiosity, compassion, and connection. Thank you for listening to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast. Be sure to follow my guest, Rachel, on her socials if you want to learn more about her. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram at Matchmaker Maria. And you can also ask a dating question for an upcoming episode, a hotline episode, by visiting matchmakermaria.com. Thank you again. Be lovable, but more importantly, be likable. See you next week.